Welcome to the Essence of the Soul.
A safe haven for all souls.
My name is Linda.
And my name is Paris. And welcome to our episode on ego death and
Dark Night of the Soul. So, happy Scorpio season!
yeah, it's Linda's season.
Yes, it is. And of course, we're going to be talking about ego death and Dark Night of the Soul. So, this is a really interesting topic because we are going through a season where it is more dark, going within, a lot of transformation, and that's exactly what ego death and Dark Night of the Soul does for you.
And this is very relevant in Scorpio placements or anybody who is born a Scorpio, I feel like. Most of the Scorpios I know are super intensive people. It's not just that you go through a lot, but it's just in your nature. Like you kind of have to.
Yeah, it's about really going deep within, a lot of like deep transformation, intensity, deep emotions, and connecting to yourself on that deep level.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll just kind of go into ego in general. I think we kind of covered this in our previous episodes, but we can kind of like summarize it again. So basically, the ego is what we identify ourselves with. It's the I or the self. And Alan Watts, who is a spiritual philosopher, described this as a socially constructed identity. So basically, beliefs that we grew up with that society has taught us to believe about ourselves. It's, what we perceive ourselves to be, but often as humans, we identify ourselves with titles, names, or what we do, but these are all just like constructs or ideas that the environment we are surrounded in has created for us. But really, it's not what we are deep within on a soul level.
Mm-hmm.
So the ego forces us to identify ourselves with our surrounding environment that we associate with. And so, for example, like we can't describe ourselves as podcasters without having to describe the podcast. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the ego creates its form of identity by the environment that it's in. And then going into like ego death, this is basically the process of deconstructing everything we've identified ourselves with and lifting that veil of illusion to really see who we are on a soul level. So like, who are you without your name? Who are you without your occupation, without your image or anything that you have, right? How do you describe yourself without those things? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have difficulty describing themselves without, describing themselves as like, oh, like I work here, or like, oh, right. I'm like in IT, or I'm a YouTuber or anything like that. But this is what really forces us to go deep within to learn who we are too. Mm-hmm. It's deeper than what you can see with your naked eye because honestly, our body is just a vessel, And so I'll kind of go a little bit into my experience with my ego death because I guess like for me, my ego death came a little over a year after I first had my spiritual awakening in 2022. And it was a very personal and very spiritual, very sacred experience for me, actually. It's not something that you just go and tell anyone, right? Same with spiritual awakenings. Like, if you go and just tell people this, they will think you're crazy. They'll think you're insane because a lot of times these are like out-of-body experiences or supernatural, like, experiences that really trigger you to awaken and, become enlightened. And so my ego death was actually with Paris. We actually kind of experienced this together, but we attended a concert of one of our favorite artists called Ellis Dream, and he was honestly what brought me into the spiritual journey. He makes very spiritual, awakening, enlightening music that really helps people on their spiritual journey too. And the first time, like Paris and we actually found this artist together, I think. It was like one night in college, like we were just listening to music and all of a sudden his music popped up. It was Follow the Vibe by Ellis Dream.
Yeah.
And from there, we just, fell in love with Ellis Dream, his story, his music, his light. And our first experience attending this concert, of course, was during Scorpio season. I believe it was a Halloween event, actually. So a lot of people were dressed up. And I think we were dressed up as angels, too. You were the white angel. I was like the dark angel.
It's really funny how, like, for me, I knew intuitively that what we were going to dress as was going to play a big role into like something that was going to happen that night. And it was really weird because I remember we kept thinking, and I was like, yeah, I don't know what to be. Like, should we just be something like basic, like angels, right? And this was actually a time when I was like, I felt very connected to angels in the moment where I was looking in the mirror and I was like, I feel like I see angels in the, or not angels,
Yeah,
but
I
wings
remember
in the
that.
mirror on my back. So I was like, let's be like angels, a white and dark angel. And it's so funny because I was thinking like, I think it's like we both knew who was going to be who. But to me, I was thinking like, if Linda wants to be the white angel, I would be completely fine with that. Like, I wanted you to want that. Honestly, I did. Because there was a part of me that was like, okay, maybe I can try the dark angel. Like, but to be more like, I think more inclusive, because I wanted you to be like, have a choice. Like, I wanted you to choose like which one
Yeah.
you wanted to be. But for some reason, she's like, I want to be the black one.
I
And
think for me, it's just like it just makes sense, like
Yeah.
energy wise, like and like honestly, I don't really wear white
Yeah.
often, so I was like, okay, you could definitely wear the white because I know that's your thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think it was really interesting because I remember you brought that up, and I'm like, oh, really, angels? Like, I don't really
Yeah.
like to dress up like
Yeah.
that. Like, oh, okay, fine. And she was like, I'll buy everything for us. Like, I'll buy your outfit. And I'm like, okay, I guess. And she's buying it. I'll just wear it.
I'm all about that, guys. Like,
Yeah.
I want to have fun. I want to go all out for like certain things. I really go all out, even though it's not necessary.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm like, yeah, like, come on, because I'm a Pisces. I like to be characterized. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get
Like,
it.
I'm like, come on, let's do it. Like, I feel like there's going to be some sort of significant thing at this event where we get to be angels. But like I said, I really wanted to see what choice she was going to make, because in this moment I was thinking like I would be willing to do either or, and it doesn't mean that one's bad and one's good, you know what I mean? It was just kind of like I wanted you to choose the white one, to be honest, because I wanted you to learn how to embrace that light too. But because it was so easy for her, she was like, oh, I want the dark one, I was like, okay, well, that's easy for me, okay. You know what I mean? And I just kind of had to go with
It's
it.
honestly like it's just like of course, like I'm gonna choose the black one. It's black, yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, it's Scorpio season. I just told Paris this not too long ago too. I feel like Scorpio is definitely my ego. That's
yeah.
like my alter ego.
Yeah.
Like I like to feel like that dark feminine, powerful, intense.
Yeah.
I really like that. And so we wore that to the rave, and so during this rave, it was a very beautiful experience.
Yeah.
Very spiritual. His music was very enlightening, and oh my gosh, I cried so much. It was so emotional. I remember us both crying, and I just remember like the visuals that he had. He had like very motivational like quotes on like his visuals of like tweets that he was receiving,
Yeah.
and like people basically just thanking him like for saving their lives with
Yeah.
his music. And I was like, oh my god, this is so beautiful. And he was just saying so much encouraging like things to like the audience, and I felt like he was speaking to us. Yeah.
This was the first rave that me and Linda went to by ourselves.
Yes.
Really. Like, it was just me and her. So we were kind of responsible for each other. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Instead of going with a big group of like, our friends, our families, right? Like, it was just me and her. And a lot of people didn't listen to Ella Stream too.
Yeah,
but
no one really knows much about him.
And he's so spiritual to the point where I think, like you said, when he was like talking to us, right? But it's funny. It was just such a crazy journey. But when he was there, I remember him motivationally speaking, like, these are EDM artists, but he's very wubby. He's very spiritual. So he says all these words. And I remember being angels, right? Like, we're characterized as angels. And it's Halloween, so everybody's dressed up. And looking at the spotlight or some sort of
It felt
light.
like there was a spotlight on us.
Yeah.
And like I think it was the stage lights that were like shining upon us.
Yeah.
And it just felt like, oh my gosh, like is he talking to us? Like this is
Yeah.
like amazing,
It felt like a mission almost.
Yes.
Like, oh my god, like he's giving me like an assignment, or I feel like we're really in heaven because we're angels. You know what I mean?
And it was like, him motivating us to spread our light
Yeah.
and share our light and continue to spread love and light to the
Yeah.
world. And so it was really awakening, honestly. And honestly, that's kind of like all I remember after that. Like, I had an outer body experience because it was such a spiritual experience
Yeah.
to me too. It was like so intense, honestly. It
came-
felt like it was out of nowhere for me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, like, Paris's perspective, but like it was out of body experience. And for me, it felt like I was peaking at the egotism mountain, like a mountain of egotism, almost like, your ego's down here and all of a sudden it's like all the way up. And I just felt so prideful and so proud of everything that I've accomplished, my career, my salary, being like a woman in IT, at the time. I was very proud of that because I had just graduated school not too long ago, actually. And so I was like, yes, like, it feels amazing because, like I am at an age where like not a lot of people like are able to have all of this. So I was really proud of that. And so that's where the ego came from, which is my career.
Yeah. There were a few things like within this night where I remember even before like all of this, before we went, like there was this confidence in you too that was like, we can go by ourselves. We can do this. Like, you know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, no, we can. Like, I think so, but to me, like at the time I was like, Linda's like a leader, you know what I mean? Like she's always been somebody where it's like if I get lost, like I look to her and like she can take me to the next destination, you know what I mean? Like that's how you are, it's who you are too. And so to me, I always had like so much trust, like no matter what. And so I think the biggest thing was learning about awareness. And in that moment when Ellis Dream was talking about like all these motivational things, like I tell you, like the crying was unstoppable for you, like to the point where I kind of was looking around and it's like it did feel like a spotlight was on us, but when I was really looking around, there were a lot of people staring at us.
Honestly, I would say I don't cry a lot, but yeah, that's why I say like now that I reflect back upon it too, it was my spiritual year, numerology 11, my personal year. So it was a very spiritual year for me. A lot of like things coming to the surface, a lot of needing to heal, a lot of spiritual experiences, and a lot of trauma that I was going through too that year.
Or was it 2022?
Yeah, it was 2022, but I hadn't turned 22 yet. It was during Halloween, so it was slightly before my birthday.
Yeah.
And I was just telling Paris this, but every time it's, getting closer to my birthday, I always go through the deepest transformation, like very spiritual, very deep, like life-changing experiences. And I mean, partially it is Scorpio season 2 and it's my birthday, but I just always like reflect back and I'm like, oh my God, I always learn and go through the craziest things during my birthday that awaken me. And that's exactly what I had went through, and it just happened to be on Halloween where, everyone's dressed up as ghosts and like scary ass shit. And so like when I started having an out of body experience, that's how I felt. I was at the highest point of my ego.
Yeah.
And I just remember like just feeling so prideful and so like proud of everything. And then all of a sudden it went like climax and it slowly started drifting down. And it was like all of a sudden unconsciously questioning myself, like, why am I so prideful of these things? Why do I care so much about money when money is just a piece of paper that we as humans put a value on?
Yeah.
It's a social construct. Why do I care so much about my career when it could be taken away from me any day?
I think like being in the perspective of like being in that journey with you.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I think it was actually your numerology year 1, 2022. Is 6 plus your life path, which is 22, right? Which is 28. So it's...
Wait, I thought it was 11.
11 is 2023 for you. Remember? 2023 was your 11 year. 2022 is the year 1.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yes. So,
yeah, that's right. It was like a new beginning.
Yeah. So
right.
And it's the 1 is about like the leader, right? The one who is like...
That's the ego.
Yes, exactly. So that's why a lot of those things surfaced, you know what I mean? But it was the year 11 that was different.
Coming soon, yes.
But so for this journey, being here with you and like getting to the point of like, you had like your thoughts about money, stability, a lot of like male figures, a lot of masculinity, a lot of things that kind of came out for you, because there's a reason too why are you such a masculine yourself, right?
Yeah, I was around a lot of men growing up, and of course my role model is my dad. And I think partially too had to do with like my upbringing. Like I've always had to be more independent and, fend for myself and just, I always felt like I had to do everything by myself. And
Yeah.
I was confident because of that. Because I did so much, I had experience, being individualistic. I had confidence in that. And, that's why I said in like our solar plexus, episode, the chakras, confidence, there's a fine line between confidence and then egotism.
Yeah.
And sometimes like you have to learn how to differentiate, when am I being confident and when am I being a little too much.
Right.
And that's the fine line between that. And so I think like, when I started to question myself, that's when I started to realize like, oh, actually, like, why am I even prideful of these things? Like, it was almost like a self-reflection of feeling like embarrassed. I don't know how to, oh, vulnerable, that's the word. Being vulnerable of like feeling the need to boast about the things that I had worked hard for, or like
Yeah.
materialistic things like this. And shortly after, like, okay, my out of body experience, I started like feeling more of my psychic abilities, especially with the clairvoyance, where I was receiving
Yeah.
images of myself literally having death, my ego death of being 6 feet underground.
Yeah.
And I just remember, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I felt like I was, dead. And it made me start to reflect on life basically in the perspective of being on your deathbed. Like
Yeah.
everything that I had been up to this point, like, did it make me happy? Was I happy with who I was? Did I live life to like the fullest of, what I wanted? Did I have joy? Did I have happiness? Did I pursue all my passions and what I wanted to do? And I reflected upon that. I'm like, no, like I didn't. And why did it take me like 21 years of my life to get to this point and realize like I should have done more? I should have like, lived my life to the fullest that I could have. And that's when, my ego death, came. And I realized like, oh, actually in that moment, I didn't know it was an ego death. I didn't even know much about spirituality.
Yeah, no, actually I was just gonna say the same thing, because I think in that moment it was it was kind of spooky for both of us.
Yeah.
But I think I didn't comprehend that that was what was happening. Like there was a part of me that was like, whatever you're going through, I need you to go through it. I cannot stop this, and I can't, like you said, it was such an outer body experience. I couldn't even get Linda back at the present moment. The only thing I was focused on was, I'm going to be a part of your journey right now, whatever's happening. And I also need to get us home, because like I can't control this. So for me, it was kind of like, wow, why does she keep saying she wants to die? You know what I mean? Or like, you talk about money, you talk about these things, like you haven't done anything, and like that you're 21 years old, and that like, these figures in your life like are taking over you, like certain things like that, right? And that you were like constantly blaming these people,
And it was like almost like the ego wanted to hold on so tight. It started victimizing itself.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
And that makes sense, and to the point where I was like, okay, like, I'm pretty like empathetic, I feel like, to the point where, trust me, like, if I always say this, I'm like, gosh, like if anybody was there with you, Linda, I don't know what they would have done with you. You know what I mean? Because it's like you were just so out of your body that who would have been there to understand, spiritually, or to like take you home, or like really care about you to that point, because it was so intense. It's like Scorpio intense, to the point where it could have taken me.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
exactly like being a Scorpio is already a lot of death and rebirths, right?
Yeah.
But this death was like intense.
It was
like,
intense.
Traumatic. And honestly, after that experience, I felt so grateful to have you there and to have you, be my angel that night, honestly.
See, and this is where it all circles. This was exactly what I was saying, because I was like, oh my gosh, we are angels. You know what I mean? Like that's where it kind of came, like everything. And the dark angel, like we can call it the shadow worker, right? Like the person who was literally going through like the most darkest shadows, the things that really came up from, like, this is stuff that the only reason why I got triggered was because it came from your childhood. It came from people that, you know, maybe you grew up with, or the ways that you grew up, that you felt like, oh, I've always been in this routine. I don't know how to like let it go. And now I feel like I'm going to die. What did I do? Right? Like I didn't do anything for myself. So now you're thinking too, I need to follow my heart. And that's where I saw all this transformation happen. But, you know, like to me, I was just kind of like, I got to let you go through this, because the thing was that I kind of knew how it goes, to the point where it was like, I know it's unstoppable. Like you cannot escape it. Okay. Just face it. And that's the only thing I could do for you.
That's exactly what an ego death and a dark night of the soul is facing your shadows and facing that darkness, that void, so that you can find your light.
Exactly.
And I will say that, you know, after that, oh my gosh, I was so vulnerable, because like a traumatic experience like that in general will lead you to your dark night of the soul. Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. You know, after that dark night of the soul, depressed, embarrassed, ashamed of myself, and I'm just like, I don't know, like, was that actually me? Like, I never knew that was like a part of me. Like, I was that prideful of myself. And you know, to go through such an intense experience like that, it really pushed me to want to change and want to do better and want to heal myself, because I realized I was so wounded.
Yeah.
It was so traumatic for me. And basically, a dark night of the soul is the final stage of purification, is what they call it. And it's also the first step towards finding your true self.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, it's almost like a death before your rebirth. And it was like filled with, you know, maybe 3, 4, 5 months of healing, doing a lot of shadow work. We mentioned before this shadow work book. I actually started using it a lot. I was journaling every night, and I was crying, letting it out, releasing everything that I've kept in over the years, and just realizing that, you know, like sometimes it is okay to cry. And I know it was so painful. I know Paris was talking about this before too. She's like, oh my gosh, when you cry, it's like the end of the world. Like everything's falling apart. And I'm like, yeah, because that's how I feel inside.
And this is like coming from a Pisces, okay? Because I cry all the time and it feels so good. But like, gosh, when I see Linda, it's like so like hard to watch. It's like, gosh, why can't we just be like happy after? You know what I mean?
No happy after crying. It's depression after crying. Like, damn, I just cried everything out. Now I feel empty. It's literally like that. But yeah, so like dark night of the soul, shadow work, and then from there the transformation begins of you know, continuing to heal and learning to live in my light and share my authenticity. And that's when this podcast came. That's when our crystals came. That's when everything else came. And I was like, wow, like all I needed to do was surrender my ego, let go of my ego, and allow my true self to shine, and everything will start to fall into place. And I will say one thing is that you don't just go through one experience of an ego death or a dark night of the soul. You will continuously keep going through this until you shed all of those programmed beliefs that you have ingrained into you. And I will say, like, I do still, you know, go through dark night of the souls, but you know, maybe it's not as intense as that very first one I had. And you know, I think you have to learn how to like understand how you process your emotions too. And understanding that everyone processes it differently. Some people have a higher tolerance to stress and depression, I guess. And for me, like, I'm kind of one of those people where it literally takes me to like bottle everything up until I'm at my breaking point to feel that much. And that's where I was at. But I've learned how to process my emotions more and how to let go and release more, where if I do face a dark night of the soul, it's, you know, more manageable for me.
Yeah, I think kind of to add on to that, I think just hearing this story again, right, after a few years and seeing your growth too, it really makes me so happy, honestly, because I think watching you grow in your journey of spirituality, right? Like we all have different journeys and different timings and things like that, but like being kind of like the person who was able to like tell you about spirituality too, right? And say, hey, Linda, like, let me expose you to all of these things, right? And then also coming to see that, wow, every single thing. Because I have lived with you and been with you for so long. I have observed all of these things about you already. But the thing was that it's not up to me to face those things for you. It's that I needed you to face that on your own, right? And I think one thing about you is that you have always been such a workaholic to the point where it was kind of like every time we would talk, it's like, okay, Linda's talking about her job, right?
Yeah.
Talking about, like her future. Yes. She wants a home. She wants this. She wants, to make money so she can have this and that. And I was like, okay, very typical life. Of course, everybody wants that, right? And so I was kind of like, okay, well, you're also somebody who didn't come out to share a lot of your deepest stories, your deepest traumas. So the moments where I had with you, where you were always sharing, and like I said, you don't share this with everybody. So to me, I feel happy that, okay, she's able to confide in me to the point where I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't know these deep parts of you that are very suppressed. They don't come out often, and a lot of people don't ask either, right? So it's to me, watching you in this journey of oh, Paris, I'm so burnt out from this job. I'm so whatever, stressed out about this and that. And you always take, a lot of stuff. You don't recognize your stress either, I feel like. To the point where you were I just gotta let all of this go. It really shows me how much of that ego death, that you faced and the dark night of the souls and everything that came through, right? To the point of true freedom and true happiness. And I feel like that's something for me, it's I always talk about following the heart, right? I'm oh, just follow your heart. It's fine.
I think I asked you one time too, how do you follow your heart? How do you even know? And your brain tells you where to go, right?
It's a struggle because we grow up with these normalized things you have to go to school, get an education, get a job, make the most money, right? You have to be a certain way. But to me, it was for me, just growing up, and this is why it's my biggest message to everyone too, which is girl, when you asked me that, I was what are you talking about? Just go deep. I think I told you, I was go deep, within, you have to go deep inside and know. That's how you know what your heart wants, and your heart will lead you there. It's your mind is just your mind, right? But it's your heart is the one thing that's actually going to take you to fulfillment. And that's why, like I said, I feel so proud watching your journey right now because, and I say, I'm gosh, guys, I didn't influence anything.
And let me tell you one thing. A lot of people did have that misconception of it's just because you're friends with Paris. That's why you got into all this. That's not real. That's not true.
Yeah.
And I'm oh no, it's very real.
Yeah, it is.
I experienced it for myself.
Yeah.
It's not just because of Paris. Because honestly, we can tell these things to anyone, and that doesn't mean they're gonna change, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've had, oh my gosh, guys, I've had even some of your family members, people come up to me and say, hey, have you noticed that Linda's been different? You know what I mean? But to me, I'm oh, of course she's different. She has to be. We all change, we're not going to be the same person from when we were 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 1 year ago, I'm definitely not. And when I see her, you're saying, oh, Linda, she doesn't drink anymore, or Linda, she doesn't whatever, right? Or she doesn't party, she doesn't want to go out. To me, I'm oh no, that's not depression. That's not anything bad. To me, I'm that's self-reflection. She's learning. She's in solitude right now, and it's not normal because your energy in the past was you always wanted to be around everybody,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Party, everything. So now it's when you take yourself out of that environment, then people start to question. And that's when, to me, I always tell people no, it's not because of me at all. Here, I'm here to teach and guide, of course, but at the same time, I'm not the reason why she's changed or she's different, you know what I mean? And I don't see this change as bad. And I think that's a lot of people actually started to see it as a really amazing thing eventually,
Yeah, it took a while to get to that because it was more of me having to speak my truth too of why I changed, right?
Exactly.
I changed for myself. I changed so I could grow. I changed so I can heal those parts of myself. What they didn't realize is the person that always wanted to go out was actually afraid of being alone and being lonely and depressed. And the person that always was out, drinking and having fun, partying, actually was running away from all the problems that they had in their life.
Exactly.
And I think that's a lot of the times where people don't do enough self-reflection to realize that these are big symptoms of someone that is facing escapism and actually going through something in their life.
Yeah.
And I think like being able to grow from that, like with your guidance and your help was, I'm blessed because not everyone has someone where they can look up to as like a mentor to guide them. And like I said, like you are always going to be a teacher and a student in your life, and you have to be able to open to receive, guidance from the people around you, regardless if they're younger than you. Like Paris is younger than me, but I still look up to her a lot. Like she knows more of like, wisdom in some areas and vice versa, right? And so like, I think the journey of spiritually awakening is having to face the darkness and knowing that spirituality is not just about light and positive and like rainbows all the times. Like you have to, in order to even bloom and transform, you have to go through your inner demons, fighting them, going through the darkness and your shadows and embracing them and understanding that those are parts of yourself that you need to embrace so that you can change. Because when you don't embrace it, you still push it away and you still like shove it away and you don't heal from it.
And I think honestly, like with like the teacher student thing, you know what I mean? I'm like, I learned so much from Linda too. And to the point where like honestly being in the position that I was in at the time that she was like awakening, the only thing I ever wanted was one person to listen. Like that was all I needed. You know what I mean? One person to like sit there and be like, okay, I'm listening, I'm understanding, I'm taking notes. Like Linda would be in the kitchen like for hours. I'd just be talking her ear off about spirituality, you know? And so to me, like it was the hardest thing for me in those moments, even though like Linda's like slowly going through her process, right? Like before that, it was kind of like I felt so lonely by myself, like dark night of the soul, right? So literally as I'm speaking to Linda about like all these things that I've learned and like, oh my God, like you have to do this and you have to understand this and blah, 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 right? Like all these things. And in those moments where Linda's like busy, you know, like she's doing other stuff and like literally you're busy.
Multitasking. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
Like she's in class, she's making dinner and she's listening to me talk, right? And so I'm like, okay, like that's a lot. But you know, like to me, it meant a lot because when you go through a dark night of the soul journey, you don't have anyone. And like you said, like you weren't even partying anymore. Like you were by yourself, right? Like that's, it was like, I was in college, so I like whatever we did, we always had to do together, right? Like with everybody. But I think for me, it was like I knew how depressed I was. I knew how lonely I was, and to the point where I never thought that if I brought these things up to anybody that they would understand me or that they would be there for me, or like they would probably think I'm crazy, you know? And I'm not gonna lie, I think a lot of people did probably judge me back then, which is completely fine. But one thing is that I felt like Linda never judged me, actually. I felt like you never did.
Of course not. Because we're so similar, you know? Like, I feel like I see myself in you.
Yeah.
Literally, like yin and yang.
I can literally cry.
I feel like, yes, it is very emotional because the way people judged you was exactly how people viewed me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we went through a lot of the same stuff, but I feel like in those moments, like I said, I only wanted like one person to talk to, you know, about stuff like this. And even if you didn't understand it or if you didn't know, you would still be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool.
I was actually curious.
You were very curious.
I was like, oh, that's interesting as fuck.
And
like,
that was
I'm surprised no one cares to listen.
Yeah, no, literally. Yeah. Or like people would just be like, oh, like that girl, yeah, she's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why.
And I'm like, maybe it's because we're both crazy.
No, that's exactly the reason. That is literally the reason.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's just when you're different, right?
Yes.
From everybody. So when, I don't know, guys, I just feel so happy that like I got to cross paths with you, and like we've had multiple roommates and multiple people that we've lived with. And for some reason, like Linda's always been the one, like me and you together, you know? So I don't know, guys, like fate, I don't know.
No, it is. We are soulmates. Like, I've known the moment I met Paris. Literally, when we talked about this, episode 1, the moment we met each other, it was like, boom, click. And I'm just like, I don't even know this girl, but like, I've been with her like this whole day, and like, I'm going to take her home to have a sleepover tonight.
Yeah, no, that's true. And no, the first thing I thought too was like, I don't have a lot of friends like that I like to keep close to me. I'm not
Yeah.
like a big friend person, and I don't have best friends. Like definitely don't have best friends, you know, like
And it's so funny because me too.
Yeah.
And at the time, I just lost a best friend.
Yeah.
And so it almost felt like making room for someone new to come into my
yeah,
life.
I feel that.
Yeah.
And that was the thing, is that I started to get kind of like, oh shoot, like I had a feeling right away, like your energy was like, she's reliable, like I trust her, like right away. I don't know why though, you know, but I think it's because I felt like I never met anybody really like you too. So I was kind of like, okay, yeah. So I've always been in the fear mode of like, I don't want to have a best friend. And I remember too the moment when you were like, this is Paris, my best friend. And I was like, oh, we're best friends. Like I was like, oh, we're best friends.
Someone had to do it.
Yeah, no, literally. And so I was like, okay, like, yeah, we're best
Yeah.
friends. Like, yeah. But and then that's when the whole journey started. Like, literally, you said you call me your best friend, and then all of these things happened.
Yes.
And like,
I'm just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Everything progressed very fast.
Very
I would
fast.
say, especially like our spiritual transformation together.
Yeah.
I feel like we've grown so much too. And like we've experienced each other's like shadows, our light. And
Yes.
grew from that together, and I'm just excited to see where we will continue going on, especially with what we've created here.
This podcast is very special, guys. It took a lot to even let go of our egos to do something like this, you know,
Exactly.
because we are still living in the fear mode of like, oh, like what are people going to think about us? What are people going to say, right? But at the same time, like, oh my gosh, it takes like a while to get to the point where you're just like, I don't care what people think. I don't care what people say. I'm here to spread knowledge, spread wisdom and light, and be here with my best friend who's here to do the same exact thing. You know what I mean? So it's all intention. And yeah, letting go of ego is not easy. It's a process, but at the same time, it's so worth it. It's needed. It's necessary, you know?
Exactly.
It's like you cannot just be like a spiritual person or like very highly evolved if you have not gone through the darkest parts of your soul, the darkest parts of who you are. And you know, that's why of course we need to appreciate our Scorpios, because our Scorpios bring out a lot of the darkness in us, and they go through death and rebirths all the time. I know Linda does, and it's intense, you know.
It is.
But it's needed.
It is needed, and that's part of the duality of life, right? Going through light and dark. So
Yeah.
yeah, well, thank you so much for listening to our ego death experience. It was very emotional and very deep. Hopefully you gained some insights on, maybe some things you can resonate with. If you've ever gone through one yourself, let us know in the comments below. And as always, please like, subscribe, and share this video for anyone that may find this helpful.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.